I thought you were still going to be traveling, so I didn't read any more Lewis.
Oh, 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 oh. That's
Where
disappointing.
it is, I agree, but I didn't know what the
What the verdict was for today?
what the verdict was. I thought, yeah, for some reason, I thought you were still going to be down in the nether reaches of the South.
I was. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. I decided to get well, okay, so here's what happened. I ended up having some guys come in for because the CREC council is going on. And
Right.
so I had some friends come in town and they needed a place to stay. And so I gave up my house and I was like, hey, you guys come stay with me. Poor folks, pray for them. So they got 9 of us that they just bunked up with, a pastor and an elder from South Carolina, Greenville. And
Oh, okay.
yeah, and so they gonna need lots of prayer. They got from a 3-year-old all the way up to a 15, almost 16-year-old. Then me and Sharon. So they wanted it. They get all they want from it.
That's true. They
So,
give them everything.
and I'm gonna make them do shows too. I'm gonna make them. They're gonna be working. Woo! That dog was not playing. Would you step on the dog?
No, he was. He's confused. He wants to get in my lap, and then he doesn't, and then he does.
You
and then he
stepped on the
doesn't.
dog, did you?
No.
Ah.
Yeah, I say up, and he lays down. He's a very well trained dog. Up, and then he looks at me like, "Why? Why? You gonna show me off?" Yeah.
Okay, right before we were about to get on here, you messed up my whole train of thought. Can we talk about what you're working on right now? Is it how far are we
Yeah.
out from launching or?
Well, I thought it would be up there today, so and ready
is it going to be?
It should be. I sent everything over, so it should be up and ready to be signed up to today. So,
Oh, that'll be awesome. Okay, so oh man, let's just open it up. So does this mean you don't want to talk about Spencer's images of life? Then is that what you're telling
no,
me? Like,
I mean we still can. It's going to be a little bit less familiar because I haven't read it since the last time I read it. I haven't read the next section.
well, that kind of is good because I read it, but I read it being tired, so
Okay.
it was kind of like it's not my best. And so I was rereading it again, which man, I do want. Do you think that you can do a recap of where we're at so far? Because from where we started to where we're currently at, and I want to do one of those things, Jason, where you remember the Karate Kid, where he's learning how to fight, but he doesn't know he's learning how to fight.
Yes.
And he's just sanding the floor, and he's painting the fence, and he's waxing the cars. I've realized now that that's officially a really old movie. Was that 30 years ago, if not more?
Yeah.
So it's officially an old movie.
Yeah, it's been rebooted twice now, basically.
Okay.
That's how old it is.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Dang. I'm old.
Yeah.
And
That's true.
oh,
We're old.
Dang.
We went and got old.
I didn't think about that, but yeah, it has been rebooted twice. And so, and nobody's really taken and done a good enough job as they did on the first one. The original was really good.
There was magic to it, even though the karate was better in the reboot with Jackie Chan and Will Smith's son.
Easily.
I guess it was kung fu instead of karate, but
that makes a difference.
It does. I think the magic wasn't there. Even though it was good, I enjoyed it. I mean, I went and watched it, and I was like, oh yeah, it was a fine movie. But there was a magic to the first one, that I think that extended into Cobra Kai. I mean, I think there was something magical about what they created that they've been able to keep it going.
Well, yeah. My whole reason for bringing that up is because there is a lot of things that. Here, I'll give you an example. There's a lot of things that we do that we don't know that God is using for us to do, and to make us and to train us. And there's muscles that we didn't know we were flexing that we're flexing. And it's almost like so I'll take another karate one, but it's almost like Neo in the Matrix when he starts figuring it out, right?
Yeah, right.
After his resurrection, he's just like, I know stuff. You know,
Right.
I can do things. And I feel like a lot of our conversations that we're having are a lot like that when it comes to the Karate Kid. There's a lot of things we're talking about, especially lately, because we've been talking a lot about Edmund Spencer and C.S. Lewis and the images of life. And it doesn't seem like I think that these things really have any applicability, immediate
Right.
applicability. And I see guys who are at least on our side, who are good guys, really get lost in this world because it's really an important reality. Cosmology is super important, but
Yeah.
then nobody lets you know how to use it, or that it's here's what you've learned. And there's that moment in the Karate Kid where out of nowhere, he's fussing at his teacher, Mr. Miyagi, and Mr. Miyagi gets fed up with him fussing, and basically says, "All right, sand the floor." Daniel Lewis was like, "What?" He's like, "Sand the floor," and then Mr. Miyagi throws a kick or something, you know, and he's
Yeah.
like, he blocked it, and he didn't know
Right.
that. I didn't know I knew how to block. I thought I'd just been sanding floors. And then Mr. Miyagi throws a punch, like paint the fence, and he paints the fence, and he blocks Mr. Miyagi's punch, and all of a sudden Mr. Miyagi starts calling out stuff, and Daniel, without any question, just reflex starts doing it, and he realizes in that moment, and then Mr. Miyagi just gets done throwing all these punches, and he bows at Daniel LaRusso, and Daniel LaRusso walks away doing all the moves, but doing them in a karate form instead of with a paintbrush, and
Right.
instead of like on his knees. And he finally got it. Like, oh, I know karate. And I think that that's a lot of kind of the things we're talking about right now is like, oh, believe it or not, these are very rich theological and virtuous and foundational pieces to your Christian walk.
Yeah.
And so you don't know it until you get into that moment. And so I just would love to go back and kind of get a recap of kind of where we're at, and then where we're going to go, maybe even to
Well,
with
I
with this.
with Edmund Spencer. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And the C.S.
I
Lewis too, I guess.
I think so. I think it's a little like um so instead of the wax on wax off and it's which is muscle memory, it's habits of thought that we're trying to develop, right? Is that our thought habits um kind of wander in particular paths, and they do that already, and
Mm.
we're trying to find those places where our thought habits wander, in the dark wood, and say, well, hey, come over here and let's hike the peak. Let's see what we can see, and get into the habit of hiking the peak, instead of the whatever walks through the darkness that we're taking. Um, and so developing those habits of thought, what we don't realize how practical it is until it starts just coming out of us. Because when you say I'm going to go start practicing my cosmology, right? There's no direct way to practice a cosmology. Um, but it sneaks up on you when you see something in a way you wouldn't have seen it before. Um,
Mm.
the that moment when you say, "Oh, the um, oh the spring is coming. Oh, this is like going through resurrection." Those first times you notice those sorts of things, um, or notice something, in your and are able to point something out to your family, um, at along the way. Hey, look at all these trees. Jesus died on one of these. That sort of thing. I mean, I'm the one of the books I'm reading right now uh, is called. It's in the other room. It's called The Tree of Yggdrasil.
Oh, you said
And
about that last time.
yeah, yeah, and it's just going through. It's actually going through uh, the Germanic myths of basically magic trees, and showing the way that God prepped the imagination poetically for the German people to understand the cross. And it's really amazing, but it also, you realize, oh, well, is my imagination being discipled, right? Because the Spirit was discipling the German imagination. And there's another really great book called I think it's called the Raven and the Cross, about the discipleship of the German imagination in the Middle Ages. But we don't think of our imagination as something that needs to be discipled, but we also don't realize how our imagination is guiding and directing our the habits that our thoughts go through. And so I like to think of it as landscaping, imaginative landscaping. You're landscaping your imagination, or your imagination is being landscaped. And there's a lot of weeding that needs to be done, but also there's a lot of planting that needs to be done. And Spencer's Images of Life is one of the things that I've found really helpful in weeding and replanting within my imagination, because Spencer is sort of the last the last great English writer before the Enlightenment. Before the Enlightenment take holds, he's the last of the great medievals, even though he's an Elizabethan, but there was overlap there, right? So that Elizabethan era is sort of it's before the Enlightenment had kicked off, but it hadn't affected the popular imagination yet. What Lewis does is he goes through and he gives us all of the different places where it's hard for a modern person to understand what Spencer is doing, because our imagination has been discipled by a different cosmos, has been formed by a different cosmos. So I think
what's forming it now? Like, when you think about what's
so think of it this way. So I think one of the great kind of comedic writers of the 20th century was a man named Douglas Adams, and he was a nihilist of the kind of technical order. So we tend to think of nihilism as a moral philosophy. There's no such thing as right and wrong, but nihilism started as a metaphysic, where you define everything. You can't know the essence of a thing. You can only define a thing by what it's not. And Douglas Adams was a nihilist of that order, and he wrote very funny. He basically kept the nihilism, he chained nihilism in one place with humor, because nihilism doesn't stay in one place. Once you let it in anywhere, it takes over everything eventually. And so he sort of chained it in one place with humor. So I read a lot of Douglas Adams, and I played the Douglas Adams, so his big his series was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That was the series.
Oh yeah, that made okay.
So they made a movie out of it, which was fine, not great, but
it's kind of bunk.
Yeah, the books. Yeah, it was just like this is only for people that already know and love the book, because it's a bunch of inside jokes. And that doesn't work for a movie. Like, hey, here's a series of inside jokes for people. But I guess that was. I mean, did you watch the Weird Al movie that he did?
No, no, I haven't seen that one yet.
Oh my gosh, it's really funny. It's a series of inside jokes, but it's Weird Al. Like, that's the joke is that everybody's in on the joke. It's a satire. So his biopic is a satire of biopics. And so it's very funny.
And that's perfect. That's Weird Al for you.
That's Weird Al for you, right? Exactly. So and it started as somebody making a fake trailer that he saw and loved and was like, hey, I got to meet these people. They made a fake trailer about a satirical biopic of my life. And then it ended up growing into a Roku original. But but what you have with Douglas Adams is he wrote his argument against so what he called the fine tuning of the universe. He said that's the strongest argument for the existence of God, and if you can show that the universe is not fine tuned by a outside source, then you can prove that there's no such thing as God. If you can't, then you can't prove that there's no such thing as God because the universe is so fine tuned. And so he came up with this argument, which is where he says the appearance of fine tuning is actually an illusion. Right? The universe it's only fine tuned because it was formed by the forces that that it looks like it's tuned to, but the forces actually formed the world. And so when we say it's so perfectly formed to these particular forces, it's because the forces tuned it. And he said it's like a puddle that's going to look around and say, man, we fit this puddle, we fit perfectly into this hole. We must be fine tuned for this hole. Well, actually, the hole is what forms the puddle. And so, his whole thing is the nature, or there isn't a nature of things. So matter ends up being formed into the shape of the forces that are applied to it. Matter is a flexible thing, and so it's formed into the shape of the forces that are applied to it. And that is so that's what you have. That's why there's the appearance of fine tuning, because we're fitting so perfectly into the puddle, into the hole that turned us into this puddle. The forces of nature, the forces of gravity, the forces of physics, have shaped us into this particular shape. Well, all of the things about modernity, all of the assumptions of modernity are right there in that argument, right? So you realize this is how we know it comes down to assumptions.
Yeah, because
Right.
there's a lot of assumptions there.
A lot of assumptions there. And when I first read that, it bothered me for a long time because I didn't know the answer. I couldn't, when I came across it as a young man in my 20s, early 20s, I didn't know the answer. Now I knew Jesus, so I knew there was an answer. Right? I had met the creator God, so I knew there was an answer. I just couldn't, I didn't have it yet. But it was actually through studying C.S. Lewis's medieval understanding of the world that I came to understand. And it was in particular reading about Boethius, and then reading and studying Boethius and the effect that Boethius's metaphysic had on the Middle Ages.
Is that why is that why you started reading Boethius? I remember you said.
Go ahead.
I remember you said that you picked out one book of the Bible to really saturate yourself in, one book of history, right, to really understand, and then one character.
Yeah, and C.S. Lewis said if you can imaginatively put yourself into Boethius's mind, then you are a medieval. Right? He said he is the because the difference between Boethius and modern philosophers is the difference between a medieval and a modern. And so because the assumptions in that argument are, one, that that matter is just putty, is a flexible thing, right? That it can take whatever shape, right? And that there isn't a relationship between the external shape of a thing and an internal essence. That there is no relationship, or what a nihilist would say, a metaphysical nihilist would say, is if there is one, we don't have access to it. There's no way to get to the essence of a thing. So since we don't have access to it, we it doesn't matter, right? So all we can do is say, well, this is in this shape, and since it's in this shape, it's not any of these other things. We don't have access to the essence of a thing. And but Boethius and the medieval and the Christian argument is, well, God's word formed it. And they've had disagreements about the relationship between God's word and the external, but whatever God calls a thing is what it is and or what it becomes, right? When God calls a thing into existence, his word is the essence of it, right? And then we've argued about whether that word stays in his mind, whether that word is embedded within the thing, whether that word is it has to do with the story as a whole, or if it's a metaphorical relationship versus an analogical relationship, right? We have all of these arguments, but every Christian agrees that word is and or gives a thing its essence, right? And so we do have access to it, and we have access to it in two ways: through the scriptures, and we have access to it through natural revelation, right? That nature itself will tell us what it is, and we're the kind of creature that receives the communication that nature gives, and we receive it poetically, right? That's the difference. So it's a difference in what kind of creature we are and what our relationship is to this place, and then what kind of place this is. This is the place that God created. So Boethius,
I gotta say real quick, this is the first time since we've done X Unplugged that I've been able to actually smoke my pipe and listen to you. And I don't know what is different about this. I don't know if it's you or the pipe, but you sound so much better when I have tobacco. I just want to say that real quick. You do, and it feels really, really good. Anyway, you were saying.
Yeah. We had Machen that said tobacco. He said, what, tobacco and bourbon are the two great lubricants of male fellowship that God has given us, or something along those lines.
I like that guy.
Yeah, I do.
Those are some of the things that we're missing. I ain't gonna lie.
Yeah, we just
some of that.
I just got my boys turned 13 and 18, so they got pipes this year.
Oh, I saw you got a new pipe too, didn't you?
Yeah, I got a new pipe too. It's over in the other room, but I really like it. It's like a wizard pipe.
Technically, all pipes are wizard pipes, but
it's true.
Anyway, I interrupted you.
But I think that you've got Boethius is at the beginning, and he is formulating. And it's funny because he's formulating it philosophically, but he's actually a much more poetic writer, because he believes that the world has a fundamental poetic nature, that his philosophy even ends up being very poetic. He's actually quite fun to read. There were two books that formulated the vocabulary of the Trinity for the medievals, and it was Augustine and Boethius. So Boethius's De Trinitas on the Trinity is fantastic. It's actually easier to read. I think it's probably a better place to start than Augustine's book on the Trinity, because Augustine has he has more interlocutors, more people he's arguing with, and so so it's a little bit more complex. And whereas Boethius is setting out to make a positive statement of the Trinity, and it's very good. So every once in a while you'll hear people say like, oh, Boethius was this, he was his Christianity is suspect, but it's not at all. If you read his writings, he has some great treatises on what is the gospel, like he wrote evangelistic treatises. He wrote on the Trinity. But his book on philosophy, The Consolation of Philosophy, is the most famous, and was the most famous throughout the Middle Ages. And there's quite a bit in there that ends up discipling the medieval mind. And it's everything from sovereignty being above fate, which is kind of the death nail the last nail in the coffin for a pagan way of thinking about history. Boethius, he pounds the last nail by giving the image of God's sovereignty over above fate, where fate is not outside or above or in competition with God anymore. And every major medieval writer, except for the post Anglo-Saxons in England, every other major medieval writer uses his particular image about fate called the Wheel of Fortune. In fact, I mean, we've got a game on television about the Wheel of Fortune now.
I didn't know that's where that came from.
Yeah. In fact, yeah, and I don't know if you read entertainment news, but Vanna White just signed a new contract.
Is she still doing that?
She's still doing it. So yeah, isn't that crazy?
Wow.
So
isn't she supposed to be striking right now?
The writers are, but I don't think you need writers for
Wheel of Fortune. Yeah,
Wheel of Fortune probably.
It's writers and who else? It's not just writers. It's writers
and actors.
Actors. She would be considered because she's union. I guess as an actress.
Yeah, you're probably right. I don't know. Maybe Wheel of Fortune isn't going right now, but I know that Vanna just signed another contract.
Well, the strike is good for some and not for others.
Yeah, I mean you can't cancel Vanna. That's just doesn't matter.
No, you can cancel Vanna. No. She's not off the table. You can cancel Vanna.
Yeah. But the point being that Boethius's view of the of what you would call natural revelation is at the heart of the medieval understanding of reality, right? So that when you get to Spencer, so he talks about when Lewis is explaining, for example, the pageants of Spencer, right? That
was in the Image of Evil, wasn't it? He starts bringing through the pageant right in the beginning of the Image of Evil.
Yeah, well, there's pageants all throughout, but yeah, right at the beginning, he starts talking about these pageants and how that's a particular medieval cosmological understanding, right? We've basically gotten rid of pageants, and I mean, you might still get a parade now and then. I know if you're down in New Orleans, you're going to get parades, and
we just get beauty pageants is all we get now.
Yeah, you get that's the closest you're going to get. And the thing that's different is a beauty pageant. You've got you're trying to unveil the beauty in front of you and put it on display, rather than veil. You're trying to veil the veil in order to in a medieval pageant, you're putting a veil over the veil to remind you that it's a veil. So you put on a costume to remind you that you're more than your day in, day out self, right? That your day in, day out self is actually a veil covering an eternal being, a being with the capacity for eternal glories and pleasures and growth, and my favorite argument for the existence of God is that every time you experience a pleasure, when you come back to that pleasure, the pleasure feels less pleasurable, right there. But that's not because it's because our capacity for pleasure is actually expanded by the experience of pleasure. And unless there is an eternal and infinite source of pleasure, to be a creature whose capacity for pleasure continues to grow throughout our life it means that we're just a clown in some sort of metaphysical circus, right? Because it's the guarantee that there's no ultimate fulfillment, right? If every time you experience pleasure, your capacity for pleasure grows, but the thing that gives pleasure doesn't,
shrinks, right?
It shrinks in relationship to our capacity, right? Well, the scriptures come and that's exactly the thing that's one of the many things that they address regularly. At your right hand there are pleasures forevermore, right? Our capacity for the kind of creature we are is a creature whose capacity for pleasure grows and grows and grows. If we're also infinite beings, which we are, then and we are created to have fellowship with an infinite God, which we are, then that capacity is good news. That capacity to grow in our experience of pleasure is good news, rather than the bad news that it is when you talk to all the existential philosophers. It's an anti-existential argument for the existence of God.
But you know what? I've been really spending a lot of time lately with my family inside of Deuteronomy. We're making our way through the Bible. When Leviticus was interesting, numbers. I mean, wow. And then you get to Deuteronomy and you start realizing just how bad idols treat their worshipers. Right. And it's so funny because I think I've gone through and thought about Deuteronomy before previously, and I've listened to other people talk about it as a book of what you can't do and here you shouldn't act this way and don't engage like this. But that's not actually, it's more idolatry and idol worship is going to destroy you. Here's how not to be destroyed, and here's where you'll find joy. Here's where you'll find exceedingly abundantly amount of pleasure, I guess you could say too, and satisfaction. And then get to the end of Deuteronomy, he's like, if you go towards the idol way, I'll destroy, I'll judge, right? And then I'll ask you where your priests and your gods who are supposed to speak for you, and because your hunger and your desire to chase after idols is the thing that the fulfillment from that you will get filled, but you'll get filled in judgment,
Right.
Right. And it's like, it's God being so kind to try and tell you this is not good for you. This is not a great diet for you. This won't really satisfy at the end of the day. It will give you, there will be some satisfaction in judgment, but it's not going to satisfy in joy. And it's so funny you say that because as you make something an idol, the more you'll run to it and you'll beg for it to satisfy. I don't know why we just don't say, I know this is not going to satisfy. Why am I doing this? We don't do that. We continue to go and chase after, like there's something that we're going to drink. Like you said, you said that before, you said we turn people into vampires.
Yeah.
Like we'll turn anything into, we'll try and get out of the person or the thing, God, who is a gift giver of the thing, but we'll try and get that out of them. And so we make them an idol. And I don't even think we know that we're doing it like that.
No. Have you heard Olivia Rodrigo's new song, Vampire?
No.
Oh, it's a breakup song. It's fantastic. It's about the realization that her ex-boyfriend was a vampire. It's so good. She's actually quite a good lyricist. But yeah, where she basically is looking back at her relationship and saying, you only took and took and took. I never received any love. And I got smaller and smaller and smaller the longer we were together. There's, and that's what idols do, right? Because they take but can't give. That's the whole point. And I think that there is something, this is the book another book I've been reading right now. I just picked it up. It's a history of horror. The best scary movies of all time. It's history of horror cinema. But because
that's a book you won't find in most Christians' library.
Well, but I've realized that we have inverted the monstrous, and that in our imaginations, and that's one of the reasons that we can't judge properly. We can't tell where the monsters are as a society, right? So I'm reading another book. It's just called Monster, and it's by a feminist film critic. It's actually a brilliant book, but she was walking through the immorality of some of the most famous leftist filmmakers and asking why did they get a pass and these other people don't. Why did we go, why are there why do we let a leftist filmmaker get a pass even though we know he raped a 13-year-old? But we give him a pass and we call him a genius and say that's okay because he has he agrees with our ideology, and so as long as a monster has our ideology, we'll let him pass. It's really she said I catch myself doing it and then realize, and so it's all about how do we face what stories do we tell to face down when real life monsters when we meet them. And I don't know any Christians writing about it, which is why I end up having to find a feminist film critic exploring.
What did she say?
Well, I'm about halfway through the book, but so far what she says is that so she's a feminist, so she often says she'll often say part of this is just because they're a man and men get away with anything, right? But when she's giving a deeper criticism, what she says is that that we know that there's a monstrousness within each of us. And so
she's a Calvinist.
I know, that's the whole thing. That's the thing it's amazing. And she's very
there's no
thoughtful.
Such thing as Arminian, yeah.
No. And so she's very thoughtful. I mean, she's even got a whole section about how when she was young, she always talked about how raising children was something that held women back. And then she had her own children. She was like, but then I realized I actually don't care about my career compared to the way I care about my children. She's like, so it doesn't. So she said it has challenged how much of this is actually external societal pressure and how much is just, I actually like being a mom.
See, Jason, when you talk like that, like hearing these people, this is something, man. So, I was just at G3 for the conference, and it was really nice. Something that I'm coming to realize as a theonomist, as a post-millennialist, as a Presbyterian, it might be a form of arrogance, I think, in the way that I'm thinking about this. But I really believe that everybody agrees with me. That is becoming my default position. I just haven't done a good enough job of convincing them
that they agree with you already.
Yeah, they agree with me already.
Yeah.
And most of the conversations that I had and I'm still currently having with some of these people, I realized I've been using, because let me start here. I think some of the things that I've learned in learning poetry, the conversation we've been having back and forth, the way to engage people, presupposition apologetics, that stuff that we learn apologetically, the things that we learn for argumentation's sake, isn't for us to use on the face of it in the argument. That's stuff for us to know. That is stuff for us to be built up in and have a knowledge of, so that we can make better persuasive arguments, not for us to use as the argument, right? So that stuff is for developing us so that the other muscle works well. So it's like the fuel, I guess you can say. It's the fuel you put into yourself so that the car can go, right? But when the car goes, nobody sees the sparks and fires and the spark plugs. They don't even need to know that stuff's happening. They just need to know the car moves. And so I found out that those things are more for me to be able to present persuasive, convincing arguments to people who don't know that they agree with me yet. And so I've stopped using presuppositionalism as, well, I'm a presuppositionalist and talk like that, and I've just started saying, what is it that I know that they already believe about God's world that is true? And how do I show them the next connecting piece to that based off of what they already believe? And so I let them answer the question in one way or another. That I guess I ask the questions to get them to say the things they know that they already believe that agree with me. Right.
Well, and I think this is the difference between a Schaefferian presuppositionalist, right? That says, oh, hey, they have to already be resting on Christ,
right,
in their mind. Okay, well, that gives me a connecting point to, right. I just have to find it, right? Somewhere they're already assuming God.
Right.
Right? It's there. They have to.
They
There's
can't
no way
help it.
around it. They can't help it. So you say, okay, they're already sitting in God's lap. I just have to talk them out of slapping him in the face, right? And convince them that he's pulling them up there to try and hug them, and you're slapping him in the face. Just receive the love of the Lord. It's a different it's a different mentality than I think a lot of presuppositionalists. They see that they instead approach it, and I don't mean this in a reading motive sort of way, but with a jealousy that says, hey, you don't get to do that. And there's a certain like as an idolater, you've got to you need to rest, you need to trust in your idols as an idolater, and you don't get to trust in the Lord. There's a certain time and a place when that's appropriate, but it's actually not. It's not most of the time in the places, right? But that we take the Bonson-Stein debate and act like we're always in it, when we're actually not most of the time. Every once in a while we are, but most of the time we're not in that.
But even I guess
spot.
even that debate argues even from my position, where it's like Bonson just proved that Stein believed, in his position.
Yeah.
Right? For the most part, that's what was so amazing about. But and that goes back to, I kind of want to make the point about the lady who is the feminist. Until God brings new life, she can't see it. She can't become alive. She can't be made new. But because people live in God's world, they are required to function off of all those principles, whether they like it or not, They can't help but function off of those principles, and so people are post-millennial, people are Calvinistic, people are covenantal, and most of them just don't know it. So, it's funny. I've been talking to guys about the whole Christian nationalism stuff, and guys, a lot of people about even post-millennialism. And it's been funny to watch a lot of them present it properly. They become pretty hardcore Christian nationalists. And what I mean by that is not like Christian nationalism as it's traditionally should be known. I mean by Christian patriot, or or a zeal for a Christian nation. Like, I think everybody wants that. Nobody wants to be sitting up here and say, I would love to be like quartered and hung and my guts dragged out of me. Like, nobody wants that. And that's the only alternatives you have. Everybody acts like there's some middle between, like, oh, you don't have to have that. No, you only get one or the other.
Right. You do run into it every once in a while in church history. Because there's a term for it, that it's called the white martyr. They're the ones that desire martyrdom. They seek out martyrdom, and because you have theologians having to explain to people, hey, that's actually not okay. It's not okay to seek out martyrdom. That's not the proper use of your life.
Jason, we want the church to be moving forward in time and history, and it only moves forward through the blood of the Christians.
Right.
So I have to go spill my blood.
Because the reality is there's always a way to spill your blood, but it usually looks like taking care, having a nice relationship with your neighbor. Like that's it has to
hospitality
do with hospitality and raising kids, and like that's the normal way that we spill our blood and deny ourselves. And then if we're and sometimes we also have the honor of being martyred by a government official or something, but we always have the honor of giving away our lives to our neighbors and friends and family.
As you're talking about that, I was just thinking, we have reading with the family Deuteronomy chapter every night, and boy, we don't take hospitality as seriously as God does. God took hospitality so seriously that he cleared some folks clean off of the deck because they didn't show hospitality. And he's telling Israel that when you get into your land and you have sojourners coming through you, don't treat them like you were treated when you got free from slavery. no one showed, and those people didn't show you hospitality. Matter of fact, some of them wouldn't allow for generations to or ever to come into the temple because they never showed hospitality. I think
Yeah.
even when they were in a need, even the Egyptians had to have 3 generations before they could come in. But the Moabites gone.
Yeah. No,
Never.
because when they met you in the wilderness, they tried to take advantage of your
Yes.
weakness. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Out. You're gone.
Yep. And there were some others when you were passing through, they didn't show you, they wouldn't let you pass through along the way, right? And so there's like he marks them out. I'm like, man, God don't play. He remembers. And like hospitality is one of those things that brings serious judgment on you, not to consider, not to do. And it's interesting because it's not just for people who are in your tribe.
Right.
Hospitality is a requirement as a human being. It's right. It covers everybody, and God doesn't play about that. And yet, that's one of the few things that we know how to do well. Like,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, it's anyway. So, but I interrupted your Boethius and where you were going with that. You were setting up those foundations for what we've been learning.
So I think the beginning of it is that when you've got these pageants, it's saying that there is a deeper reality that that day in day out life is a veil over, right? So your average neighbor is an eternal being. The plumber that comes over to your house is an eternal being,
right?
And they are built for a glory far beyond what you could handle if you were to just run into it straight. And so instead, God veils us with the day in, and he veils that eternal glory with a covering of the normal parts of life. But the pageant was a way of remembering. So the only real pageant that survives, we've got other pageants, but the only pageant that survives from the Middle Ages is Halloween, where we put everybody in a costume and we send them as beggars door to door, right? And the beggar receives the best thing that there is, right? The beggar receives the candy. So that is a medieval pageant.
Interesting.
Where you remember you're more than who you are, right? You're much more than who you are in your day in and day out life. But you're also much more in need than you are, than you like to think. And in spite of it being grace that God gives us, he gives us the best things, not because we deserve it, but because we're beggars and he's that kind of God. So we show up as beggars and walk away with the cake, that sort of mentality or that sort of reality is put on display by a pageant, by a pageant of by the pageantry of Halloween. And
will Christmas be a pageant too? Is Christmas a form of a pageant?
Well, we've mostly removed all of the pageantry from Christmas, right? So there's a little bit, you see a little bit here and there.
Yeah. I got it.
With and you see a little bit of it is left over with Easter, but most
but nobody's dressing up. Yeah,
exactly. Well, we still have like Easter dresses and things like that that I think are good and appropriate, but it's not really a pageant the way they used to have, a parade. Everybody in costumes and they parade and so, and I think that's just because our cosmology doesn't allow for pageantry anymore, right? They used to look up at the sky and see a pageant, right? The stars were a pageant, that they were showing us something beyond themselves, that there was a deeper reality at play up there. And so but all of that is gone. all of we don't even, I mean, most of us don't even know the zodiac anymore, so we don't know what pageant God has put in the sky. We don't we don't have any sort of um and it and if we have any relation, if we know the zodiac, it's because we had some sort of relationship to astrology, which is not the pageantry of the scriptures. The pageantry of the skies is not astrological. It's it's a story. So the and you started, you had in the 18th century, you started having, it was forgotten out of kind of the normal parlance, that you started having people try to write it down. And so there's a couple of good books that were written in the 1800s, called like The Gospel in the Stars and things, where they tried to record,
All right.
here's what,
I'm on
here's what.
Amazon.
Yeah. I think that one you can probably, I mean, you can probably get a PDF or a free Kindle of it. It's old. But then D. James Kennedy he wrote a book about the Gospel in the Stars as well. So this is not like
Kennedy?
crazy stuff. Gordon Wenham also, he's got some really good stuff on the pageantry of the stars. And like,
Okay, the
those
Gospel
dudes are
Stars.
just Presbyterians, right? They're like day in, day out Presbyterians. So I'm not saying anything crazy.
Wait, this is crazy. Joseph Sisis?
Sisis, yeah.
Oh, it's on Kindle too. Okay, I might get the one on Kindle. So who else? Okay, Joseph Sisis, D. James.
Actually, Gordon Wenham's commentary on Numbers. He's got a whole section on.
Oh, I have his Proverbs. Is that Gordon Wenham?
That's Gordon Wenham. Yeah, he's great. But his commentary on Numbers, it has a whole section on astrological. It's just astrological community, like that kind of the astrological pageantry. Because the Book of Numbers, every number in there is an astronomical number.
I've heard James Jordan talking about that. The numbering of Israel was to be like a star setup, right? Like some sort of, so that because of the prophecy to Abraham, the promise to Abraham, your generation will be like your tribe, your people will be like the numbers of the stars, and so the numbering of Israel was like the numbering of the stars,
right? Yeah, where it's like you got 521,000 of these people, and it takes Mars 521 days to go around the sun, and so that's
Gordon Wenham's Deuteronomy, or no?
No, Numbers. His numbers commentary.
I'm all stuck in Deuteronomy. All right, I'm getting that one. Add that one. Numbers and introduction and commentary.
Yeah, and I think and then
oh, this is on Kindle too.
The commentary on Revelation by Chilton has really good stuff in there about it as well. I think that's where I found the Wenham. I think he footnoted Wenham, and so I went and found Wenham, and then Wenham footnoted Seiss or Sisa, and that's how I found that one. And then they also footnoted this French theologian that had a really cool stuff on.
Nobody ever talks about stuff like that. I don't know, like until you brought it up, I don't know who else talks about. I mean, you guys who people would put on the fringe,
but Wenham's not fringy. DJ
James Kennedy's not
fringy. Like these are just like middle of the road Presbyterians, but they're just old enough
to have that that's interesting,
because they're just a part of just an old enough previous generation that you were still allowed to talk about cosmology.
Interesting. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
So as Spencer's as Lewis is working through it, he goes through the idea of pageantry as a way of showing the difference between the cosmologies of the Middle Ages and the modern, and then he goes into the allegorical nature of communication, right? So that's when he talks about the false Cupid, the false Cupid, and the way that we set up um, we have an image of what false love is, that and that the medievals had a much more developed image of false love. So, and how we can learn from their image of false love. And then he goes into the different kinds of gardens, at which symbolize the different possible uses and misuses of our sexual life, right? So that there's multiple proper ways to understand our sexual life, both in experience as well as an allegory, right? As we are living an allegory, but also experiencing. So it's kind of an existential and eternal, or existential and allegorical layers to our own life. And then there's a misuse of the experiential aspects, and then of the there's a misuse of that allegorical nature, right? There's a way to use our sexuality selfishly, and so we don't we're not properly living out the allegory, right? So we're living against life, because life is designed a particular way, and so we're instead leaning into death. And so and he does this with different kinds of gardens. And then there's a way to use our sexuality to attack God, because we're made in the image of God. But there's also a way to lean into life and use and live out the reality that our sexuality is one of the ways that God fights death in history, right? So death becomes one of the rulers of history because of our sin, and isn't finally defeated until Jesus's second coming. But in the meantime, he's fighting death, and he overcomes it within history on a regular basis through the sexuality of humans and animals, right?
Wow.
So we get to be a part of that, lean into the life-giving reality of how God made us, by getting married and having children, and raising up children that have children, and having animals and pets, and that have babies, and and all of that is this continual overcoming of death that the Holy Spirit is doing, and we can walk with the Spirit in our sexuality in that way.
So we
can also honor God in an allegorical sense by living out the relationship that it's meant to symbolize.
So anything that comes across our plates, or anything that comes across our consumption, that has wants us to stop having children, wants to destroy sexuality, wants us to not be good stewards of creation, that's pure demonic.
Right. Yeah. The devil hates babies, because every baby is a reminder that God came as a baby,
right,
to destroy death and his reign.
Oh man, we don't take that seriously enough.
No, we really don't. And I think that's one of those things that we've walked away from, one of the life-giving aspects of reality, and said, no thanks. too complex.
All right, that's good. So
that's the gardens, Belphoebe, Amoret, and Adonis, and then and then he gets into that kind of flows into his understanding of the mutability of creation makes it possible for us to fall, but it also makes it possible for us to be redeemed,
because of those things you just named.
Yeah, because of those things we just named, right? So Gnosticism and modernity is fundamentally a Gnostic worldview. Gnosticism hates history, right? It wants to, thinks we need to be rescued out of history, whereas God's the scriptures give us a positive view of historical development, right? That being a part of history is in and of itself a blessing. And so the philosophical underpinnings of that have to do with the realities of what's called mutability, right? So you can't have the possibilities of growth without the possibilities of you can't have you have possibilities of growth without the possibilities of death, right? So when God created this place mutable, changeable, able to be changed, and the it was so that the human race could grow and mature as a human race, right? So and this is what you really don't see. This is something that's really hard for us to grasp as moderns, because I don't think because I think there was an attempt at secularizing this particular doctrine in recent memory, um, and so we've rejected the doctrine because of the people that tried to secularize it. So
Like
you had the
post-millennialism.
post millennialism, right? So the idea that you could have the human race as a race could mature, it means it can also demature, or you know
Retard.
go in yeah, exactly, go in the wrong direction. But without that ability to go in the wrong direction, then you don't have the ability to go in the right direction. And so it's the reality is that the human race grows in maturity sometimes, but then it shrinks from maturity other times, right? And that there's a
We've seen
corporate,
that.
yeah, we really have. And so right now you see there are areas in the third world where the church is growing, and people groups there are maturing, and then other places where we're becoming more and more like children. In the West, we're becoming more and more like children. They just was it this was last week that you no longer have a dress code for Congress, like things like that.
Yeah,
Where you're like,
right.
like, oh yeah, look, we're infantilizing. We're moving more
But
towards infants.
you only find that kind of thing where judgment is, where idols are reigning. You don't find
Yep,
it where, you know what I
absolutely.
mean? So the immaturity is something that's like, oh, yeah, this is judgment, especially for a nation like ours, right? A nation like ours that has been a mature nation and been maturing for a long time. You only get that, you only start dematuring, like you said, when you false gods are cruel, dude.
Right.
False gods are cruel.
Yeah, they take and don't give. They it's like a 8-pound leech.
Yes. Yes.
It's like, man, I don't know why I'm sick all the time. Like, well, you got an 8-pound leech on your back. Like, no, I don't think that's it.
It's just a part of my skin.
That could
Never be
possibly
it.
it. So, and then that brings us to where we are now, the image of good, and the uh, basically the we um we don't our imagination does have a picture of what goodness is. Right? Everybody's imagination does, and but there's a way of discipling that image within our imagination towards true goodness. And so for the Christian, the ultimate ideal is Jesus. But so often we just have a picture of Jesus in our mind that isn't being informed poetically by the scriptures. So, and this is why you have sometimes people, you have the one side where Jesus is constantly in the temple flipping tables. He's always got a whip. He's all, and then on the other side, that you've got the people that Jesus is always carrying a lamb out of the wilderness, and he's softly singing to it. And the reality is both of those are true.
Right.
That's one person, and each side, we use the other side's error to justify our error, rather than trying to truly submit our imagination to be discipled by the scriptures. I remember how when I was a brand new Christian, it was in my baptism class. so I was getting ready to get baptized, and the baptism class required that we pick a gospel and read it. All right, so we had to read through a gospel and then in a week, and so so we read it through and come in with questions. That was the idea, and I'm reading along, and Jesus says, "Hey, we have to, or they're supposed to pay taxes," and Jesus says, "It's not required in the true authority structure of reality, but go fishing and pull up a fish, and you'll find a couple of coins in there, and we'll go pay." And I was like, "What the heck?
What just happened?
I don't understand what's going on." And so I came in, and I was like, I'm reading this. I have no idea. I don't get what's going on. And thankfully, the person teaching my baptism class, it's Bruce Gore, he's a great teacher. He said, that is the experience of your whole life. Right? That's what following Jesus is like. Wait, what? Jesus, I don't understand. It's like, well, you're going to learn more what I'm like, more and more what I'm like constantly. And it's constant. The person of Jesus, the personality of Jesus, what Jesus is really like, will constantly be a challenge as you grow and change, because that's the whole point, is getting to know Jesus and becoming like him. That's what the whole Bible is about. That's what every prophecy is about. That's what everything is about, getting to know Jesus and becoming more and more like him in your personal Christian walk. And I was like, all right, well, let's get baptized then, right? And that was, I mean, I'm still grateful for that moment of discipleship that he took advantage of to basically, instead of saying, well, let me answer that particular question, of seeing the wisdom of the moment, seeing in that moment that here's the wisdom to be learned. And I mean, it was years of studying the Gospels before I started to get any sort of handle on them. They're so challenging. Not in terms of being hard to read. They challenge the modern conception of who I am, of what kind of place I live in, of what God is like. It's just constantly putting pressure on what I have imagined for my image of good, of perfect, of a good person, of good human, of a restored human, of a restored world, of what the nation is supposed to be like. This constant challenge in the Gospels, and really all the scriptures, but the Gospels in particular, are constantly challenging my imagined image of good.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're constantly discipling it. The more I spend time in the Gospels, the more I think, I'm off here, I'm off there, man, I'm off again. And then there's the process of, like, now that I know it, I'm also bad at applying it, but that's a whole nother.
Yeah, that's there's a who was I talking to about this? But I was talking on Knox Unleashed. That's what I'm calling it. I told you about that, right?
Yeah.
Knox Unleashed. I'm doing nightly. I was talking to David Reese on Friday, and he was working through the prophet, priest, king function of. He's talking about dominion, and dominion has three ways that it flows out into the world, and it operates through the office of prophet, priest, king, right? And first with individual self, and then through the family, prophet, priest, and king has a husband is to be that in his house, and then how the wife is to be the prophetess, the priestess, and the queen, right? And how she helps him fulfill his offices, or helps him fulfill dominion. And one of the things that was really interesting was that I'm understanding the priestly role is so important, because you need that in order to be able to be kingly, right? Like the wisdom that it takes to be a king is to operate with the priestly laws and execute them as a king. And if you don't understand those, you don't gain wisdom. And so then you don't know how to apply it to a situation as you rule, even in your own home. And in the most simple things, like, it takes a king to be able to decipher between your 3-year-old and your 7-year-old about who took whose toy and who deserves a spanking and who doesn't, or if anybody deserves a spanking. Like, and we think that's so simple. We think that's so basic, but it's really not, because those are the kind of things that you can walk away from and say, y'all stop playing, leave me alone, and go have some fun outside. Bye. But if you're going to exercise what it is to be a king, you're going to have to figure out, okay, who are the witnesses? What's the standard? What happens to the person if they lies? Does it deserve a spanking or not? How many times have we worked through this? It takes, and that's kingly work. And that's the kind of work that you have to be a good priest to be able to do. You have to be the guy who knows what the laws are, how you're supposed to do this thing. And it takes a king to execute those things, priestly law. And so, and so part of the things that you were just saying is like, man, we don't have good kings. And we don't have good king. We can't be kingly because we're not good priests.
Right.
Right. And it's hard to be a good priest without a prophet. You need the word, And so it's just funny how all of those things are a form, I guess, too, a form of maturity. But you're right. The more that I'm reading the Gospels too, the more I'm just reading just biblical law and Deuteronomy, the more I'm understanding, like, man, we really just we don't have wisdom. We don't have wisdom, and we haven't spent enough time in God's word to gain it and glean it to be good priests,
and I think we are willing to submit. We are willing to come in and bring our questions to the text, but we're not willing to submit what questions we ought to be asking to the text. Right? We don't.
What do you mean by that?
We're willing to come and say, okay, here's the thing I need to know the answer to. What does the Bible say? What we're not willing to, what we often don't do is come and say, what does the Bible tell me I should be asking it? What does the Bible tell me I should be, what question should I be asking that I don't realize I'm not asking? Right. And let the Bible inform our imagination, our questions, our queries as well. Because I think we're happy to, because I think that tells us that we aren't in control.
Right. Well, also too, it's like part of it is I think it's some of the Nicodemus effect too, where it's like, aren't you a teacher of the law and you don't know what it means to be born again? I mean, if you buy into some of the modern Christian evangelical talk, you would think that a lot of people believe being born again was something that was new. It came along with Jesus, but Jesus didn't think so.
Right. Yeah. Well, and how when the book of Hebrews says, oh, well, you're just getting the milk of the word. And he lists into that the doctrine of baptism as the milk. Like, this is the baby stuff, right? Man. And we're not even there right now. Like, we're not there.
No, not even close, bro.
Not even close, right? We're
not even close.
That's something that we can't seem to find any sort of agreement on right now in the modern church, which I think means it should be assigned to us that we say, well, shoot, we haven't got our infant stuff together. We're not ready to be kings. We need to get we need to stop and say, how could the doctrine of baptism be the baby theology? That's a hard one. That's a hard question for us, but I think it's because our imagination is undiscipled and undisciplined, but undiscipled mostly.
Part of the reason I wanted you to go through what you just went through over the last 40 minutes was because I wanted to talk about what you got going on next, which is really exciting. So right before we got on here, You sent me a text message that messed up the whole thing I was planning on talking about today. I think you did it on purpose because you didn't do your study for last night.
Yep.
And so
I was like, I got to distract him from
and it
from
was a
what I was
distraction.
supposed to be ready for.
Well, yeah, it was a good distraction, but it should be up now.
Yeah.
The classes for the FLFU. So FLF University, you're going to be starting to do classes on that, and you got your first course up and ready to go. When does it start?
I want to. Well, I would like to start it. It starts when I've got to get a certain number of people before I can start it. So, but I'm hoping that sometime maybe the second or third week in October, we can kick it off. So maybe right after the
conference,
the week after the conference, we'll get it kicked off. And so it's once a week for 8 weeks. We're going to do an apologetics. I'm going to teach an apologetics class, and I'm calling it developing apologetic habits of thought, because it's not really a traditional apologetics class in the sense that because we're not just going through the questions people think they should be asking, or the questions that people will be asking, but we're also trying to see how people in the modern world answer the questions the Bible puts forward as the questions humanity should be asking.
We should call this a cosmological apologetic.
That would be that'd be a good way, but I don't know if people would.
They have no idea what we're talking about. But everybody knocks on Plugwood, they'd be like, "Oh, I know what he's talking about. I'm in."
Yeah,
but you're right. That's interesting, because that's when I was going through looking at kind of the titles. You still got some presuppositional stuff in there.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I think that presuppositional. Well, first off, presuppositional and classical, I think, is a false dichotomy.
Oh, interesting.
But only because a classical apologetic they were just still dealing in a shared cosmology. Presuppositionalism arises when you no longer have a shared cosmology, right? So that's where, historically speaking, Van Til has to come along and say, we don't have a shared cosmology with them anymore, right? Right. That's gone. But at the same time that Van Til is saying it, C.S. Lewis is saying it. You have G.K. Chesterton had been saying it, right? So Van Til's not the only one developing what we call presuppositional apologetics. You've got other people doing it in England right before him. And then you have other people in America are beginning to develop it as well. He's a very clear communicator, and he's developing it in a philosophical setting. But that presuppositional apologetic is just saying, what do you do when you don't have a shared cosmology? Right. This is how the classical apologetics, they will say, since we've got a shared cosmology, we've got this starting point. Here's some arguments that you can make. All the classical arguments for the existence of God don't start getting questioned until the cosmology gets shifted. Right. So it's not that when you read somebody like Aquinas arguing for the existence of God, he knows and even mentions, I'd have to go find it, but it's in his section on the 5 arguments for the existence of God. He even mentions that he knows that these don't bring people to Jesus, right? But he says, but this is something that is still important for us to put forward for the sake of our neighbors, right? We should be showing there are good reasons to believe in the existence of God, but anyway, that classical presuppositional, I think,
that's a really good. I like how you did that. That kind of merged them together, because I've heard people even who are presuppositional say, yeah, when I'm talking to somebody who is more even in my side of it, I'll use a more classical method. And so they'll bounce back and forth depending on what kind of person they're talking to. And it's because
Right.
they're sharing a cosmology with the person that there's no, their presuppositions are already set.
Right. Yeah, because C.S. Lewis, he will drop a presuppositionalist hammer right in the middle of an argument. He'll do it in Mere Christianity or in Christian Reflections or God in the Dock, and where he just says, look, if we can't agree on this up front, then here's the issue that you run into. You have you end up with nothing left. Right? But since we are going to agree on the existence of reality, right, so he knows and fully understands and has a well developed what we would call presuppositionalism, but he also knows that unless you're dealing with somebody who's actually dug into maybe a French existentialism or a German deconstructionism or something, you're not really dealing with somebody. You're dealing with somebody that still has one foot on a historic Christian cosmology, because you can't actually live without it, right?
That's impossible.
Yeah,
that's what I was
impossible.
talking about earlier. Yeah, and that cosmology touches everything. How you do politics. Yeah. I mean, it touches everything. Oh, I just broke my microphone. This is what happens when you have your studio in your house and you've moved it from. I try to do something because I'm going to be doing so much at home. All right, I want to talk about just real quickly how many people are actually. You have a limited amount of seating in these classes.
Yeah.
So it's like 20, 23. What's the number?
Yeah, so 22, and then after that, if a person comes along and says no, but I really need to take it this time, because I'll offer it again. And I've gone back and forth. Do I want to do an apologetics 1 and then apologetics 2, or just offer apologetics 1 a couple of times, or I don't know how we'll do that. But so that's the first class is that we're going to offer and fill up. And then the second one that'll start in November is called The Mission of God for the Family. And it's it's I don't want to call it a biblical theology of the family, because I think biblical theology is a term that's been co-opted to mean something different.
Everybody uses that.
Yeah. So but what is it? So letting the Bible tell us what our family is for, and then how it's supposed to function. So it's an attempt to dig in at a deeper level than we normally do to a theology of family. So and some of this is cosmological, but some of this is actually trying to read the Bible as a story of a family, right? The story really of two families is what it is. The family, the devil's family, your father, the devil, and of Christ's family, all the way back to Cain and Abel.
There is a big attack on manhood and womanhood. I think people have missed the target on some of this, because they aren't talking about, they're coming after single individuals, they're coming after the man, they're coming after the woman, they're coming after the kids. But nobody's put it together that they're actually trying to destroy the family unit.
Right.
Like the thing they want to destroy is not like an individual by itself. They know that. That's right. That's part of the wickedness of it. But they want the family itself demolished.
Right.
Right. And they want to restructure it and recalibrate it to work for themselves. But it's been disappointing. That's not how you would think that would have been. Go ahead.
Well, but because the family is an interdependent unit, you only have to get one of them.
That's right.
To destroy it, right? So the generation gap, feminism, and chauvinism are all three simultaneous attacks on the family.
And,
right.
And you would think that we have more conferences talking about that, especially at the current time and era that we're in. Was like there's such a high, since the sick man, even before that, I'm sure, but particularly there's a high concentration on family destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see enough of an attention put on that. Do you?
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
No, I don't. So the attention. Well, here's, and I don't mean this. I don't.
No
This, I don't
caveats.
mean,
Just
yeah,
say it.
no
No, you
caveat.
don't get to caveat it. No, I
Well,
know. I know. Go ahead.
Okay. You will have conferences, or within specific conferences, you'll have something like responding to feminism, responding to this or that. What we don't have is a positive vision for our families. Here is what your family is for. Here is what God has given. This is why God created families. Here's what families are for. Here's what families do. And here's how families accomplish what God gave them to do. Right? We don't have a positive vision for the mission that a family should be on. And so we only live defensively, as if we can defend against, if we defend against the attacks, that automatically the family will be good. But that's actually not true. And so we pour all
That's
of
the
our
same.
energy.
Oh, Jason, that's the same thing we've done on the whole conversation with Christian nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
It's like people see Christian nationalism rising and they've just come up, we got to defend against Christian nationalism. They do, and they never point out, well, here's the way forward. Here's the plan. And not some Lord, and I'm so sick of this false sense of, well, let's just be faithful. Like, faithfulness actually has a strategic plan put forward in order to function. Like, you can't just throw it out there. Like, faithful doing what so that we can topple idols? Like, what do you mean? Because faithfulness has a promise that's connected to it. It's a prerequisite of the covenant. The covenant has some succession, has blessings that come with it, right? It has sanctions. So you're so right, because I'm hearing a lot of people critique, but then they don't lay out, here's a plan, a Christian political science for what it looks like to engage even.
Right.
And
so, yeah, I had a really good conversation with my pastor recently about that exact thing, where he said, he was like, the problem is, and just how he put it was, he said, the problem is the church has a specific role, and if it tries to do the role of some other jurisdiction, then it's not going to accomplish its role. And I said, well, what is its role? We convert people, we disciple people, and then we send them off to go transform their jurisdiction. I was like, yeah, that's what. So if that's what you mean by faithful, like, we convert people from their idols to the worship of the true God, and then whatever it is that God has called them to, we disciple them in that role, right? So if you got a politician, you disciple that politician to, how do you be a Christian politician, right? How do you be a Christian plumber? How do you be a Christian husband, wife, right? What all your other jurisdictions, the church teaches you how to apply your faith, the scriptures, into that jurisdiction. If that's what you mean by faithfulness, then we're all on the same
absolutely
team, right? You convert whoever it is, whoever is around you, you convert them, and then you disciple them to go do their job. But we often say, just be faithful, instead of saying disciple the nations.
Well, and I think we miss in the idea of just conversion itself is a whole lot of bringing covenant lawsuit, right? Like,
to explain that.
So I think that there's when we see wickedness and we see evil, particularly from a nation, we're to say with bold voices, you don't get to do that. And it's the rebuke that comes because we have a king who is reigning, and they are breaking his standards and his laws, and we get to bring the lawsuit and deliver it like, hey, we're bringing you up on charges before the King of Kings.
Here's what it was really hard. So city council, or the city council. I live outside the city, so it's not my city council, but the city, one of the cities in my county. Um, but where our church is in that city, they had they were going to respond to the overturning of Roe versus Wade. My pastor was the only one who showed up, right, and spoke about here's how you ought to respond. I'm a pastor here in town. Here's the response that you should give. But think if every pastor showed up, right, and said, right, every pastor showed up and said, hey, here's, but I don't know. I mean, most Christians don't believe the church is a public institution anymore, right?
A real government,
a real government, right? That has a real voice, that has so he showed up, said, here you go. Here is, and because he's the only one, he could say, here's what the church says, there's something nice about that. But because there weren't any other pastors there to speak. But that's a different view. That is a different view of the church even than 200 years ago. Maybe 100 years ago. I mean, in America, it was 1880s is when it started to shift away from the church as a public institution. So that's 150 years ago. But 200 years ago, the pastor is seen as a public office. That he holds a public office. He's an ambassador of the kingdom of God to the other kingdoms, to the kingdoms of the earth. So there is the discipleship, and then the ambassadorship are the two things that if you're like, we've got to be faithful, but you're not willing to define what you're being faithful to, then I think it's an excuse to not be faithful.
Have you seen
your just be faithful is an excuse to not be faithful? But if you're willing to say, well, here's what I mean by just be faithful, and have the conversation and enter into the conversation with other Christians, and you're actually seeking out, like, because that is the truth. Like, it is just be faithful is the right answer. It's long, but it's got to have content.
Yeah, you got to be theonomous. See, I told you everybody agrees with me. So I got to ask you this, because I wanted to ask you last time, but we didn't have enough time, and we're about to run out now. But because on that topic, okay, so you have an apologetics one that's hopefully going to drop in the next couple weeks, mid-October. You have a family. What do you call it? Because
the mission of God for the family. I think I'm going to call it the mission of God for the family.
Cool. So the FLF University is about to get heavy, because we're going to start having a lot more content come through there, and you're going to be doing a lot of that content. And I think we talked about this, is you're going to be having other people come in and teach some courses as well.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for some confirmation, but I think we've got a book, writing writing a novel, a course on writing a novel, which I think is going to be fantastic. Can
you do one just on like writing
on economics? Yeah, I want to do one on writing. Yeah, but I think we're gonna get one on family finances, which I think is going to be a great.
Who's doing that one?
John Kapelak. He's my brother-in-law, actually, but he teaches a great course on basically, how to submit your family finances to the Lord. And it's really good.
I need to take that one.
I need to take me too. So that one will be really good, very practical. I want to get somebody that can teach on investment, but I haven't found anybody yet. So but then also so I want to do one like the Great Conversation 1, 2, and 3 on the kind of the history of the development of the conversation of the West, kind of Western
interesting
philosophical literary. So I've got a number of teachers that in mind that hopefully we can share that load.
Can I just, so
and do,
the point of the reason for doing the FLF University is we talked about this before, and what we want to do is was it who's the guy who wrote the president of Princeton, Eliot, C.H. Eliot, Charles Eliot, was it? I think that
yeah,
was it. Charles Eliot said that he wanted to create an education for a man who could not get one. And so he created the 5 foot bookshelf. You told me about this.
right. Hmm.
And he said he picked out and selected a certain amount of books that would take a man somewhere between 5 and 10 years, but who would need to have a free man's education. So he's like, some people got into work and got into the field, start taking care of their family, and don't have a full-time schedule to go to school. But he created a way for them to be able, if they got this bookshelf, they can still have a free man's education. And it's like, no
Right.
one is really, I want to do something that gives us the ability to give people who are podcasting, who are doing, who can listen to podcasts because they're driving all the time, to be able to have access to get basically a free man's kind of a classical
Yeah.
education in a different format. And that's what the FLFU is turning into, being able to develop that type of education, but inside of these sessions that we're making. And so it's a free man's education.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
And so that I think and that's what I want the great conversation classes to be the backbone of it, right?
mm,
That says, let me give you, so because the goal is literacy,
mm,
that's the goal. But you have to have some idea of where you are in the conversation to be able to really be literate, right? So, um,
mm.
literacy literacy in Western civilization means that you can pick up any one of the great books, um, and with a minimal introduction, here's where it is in the conversation, be able to enter in and say, oh, I know basically what came before, I know the outlines of the conversation, and so I can enter into it anywhere. That's the goal. And so
Boy, I'm not
if you
literate.
what's it it takes a
Uh,
significant commitment, but not but but not not a significant amount of time necessarily if you've got a teacher, right? If you have to,
right.
and so that's what I'm hoping the university can provide, is the teachers that say, well, let me guide you through the great conversation, um, so you don't have to figure out Plato on your own. The reality is Plato's not hard to read, um, but you still need some introduction, and some, a guide, and to
Be my
know what the
Virgil.
conversation is. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, and because the if I could sit in the corner with my pipe and a old fashioned and Italian Renaissance poetry all day, that's what I would do with my life, right? That's the but the um but if you don't have anybody to converse with, because nobody else is there, then you got to become a teacher. Well, I think that's what, most dads would love to be for their family, right? Like the um my daughter was just got invited to her first podcast to be a guest. Um and it makes me really proud, because but it's the conversations we've been having, as you raise up, you raise your children up as conversation partners in the great conversation, and then you see them go out and kill it. Like they're um it's that's what most dads, I think, want. That's what they want to be. But we just need a guide. um we need a conversation partner to get us to the point where we can then be that conversation partner for our kids.
Man, we
So
gotta get that. We gotta get that website up so people can. You said it should be up this week, right? Or today?
I think it'll be up by the end of today. Yeah.
Man, is there going to be a list of all the courses that people could sign up for too? Or
That's
um,
what I'm working on that right now.
okay, but right now the
So,
apologetics
but
one, I'm going to
yeah,
take that one. I'm going to, and you don't have to be there live, but the only way to get them
yeah,
is through
yeah.
these
So
courses.
it'll be recorded. Um, it'll be once a week, in one evening a week, probably Tuesday evenings, and then it'll be recorded, and so if you can't make it, then you can still watch it, and then
Oh, but it'd be great to ask questions and stuff.
Yep, that's the idea.
Yeah, it's awesome. All right, so next week we're actually going to get back into.
Yeah, we'll finish the image of good.
Yeah, I'm like page 89, I think, is where I stopped at. Just so you know, I didn't do my reading either, and I was trying to get it done, but I didn't get it done. So I was very, very glad you sent the apology. We didn't even go through all the stuff on the apologetics, but next time we'll do that.
So hey, dude, I got to page 94, so I still was ahead.
Oh, you could have talked. You're 5 pages ahead of me, so that would have been great.